Yeah, and I don't think I've done anything that I regret. No.
Yeah,
everyone interprets that message the same way these days. Religion in this country even seems weaponized at times. As a man of deep faith, which you obviously are, does that frustrate you at all?
The followers. And there was injustice in that. And, you know, anytime you see injustice taking place,
to appreciate it. You can be an atheist and love the show. And we get letters and messages from atheists all the time saying...
There are interviews, and then there are moments that shake the room. Moments that leave even the most hardened skeptics scrambling for words. Jonathan Roumie's conversation with this interviewer was one such. First, let's just briefly mention the view, which Jonathan also mentioned later on.
We're kind of referring to whoever they are in that space that might be hostile towards people, you know, that have my beliefs. Would they even care to have me on? And if they care to have me on, well, why do they want me on? Is it just to try to make...
Yes, that view. From the very moment Jonathan Roumie sat down on The View, it was clear this wasn't going to be a lighthearted promotional segment.
Everyone interprets that message the same way these days. Religion in this country even seems weaponized at times. As a man of deep...
But instead of reacting defensively, Roumie did what few could. He stood his ground, not with anger, but with calm conviction. He brought clarity, compassion, and most importantly, truth. First and host start asking him about the anger on Jesus, which she really think can stop Jonathan, but wait for Jonathan reply.
Side of him, though, we see what I'd like to call righteous anger. Can you talk about what brings him to that place?
Jonathan answered absolutely nothing but honesty.
Grace with all those encounters.
Now, often when we think of Jesus, we think of his peacefulness, right? The Prince of Peace. This season, we see another side of him, though. We see what I'd like to call righteous anger. Can you talk about what brings him to that place?
Yeah, hypocrisy. Hypocrisy within the church establishment, the temple establishment of his time. So seeing religious leaders basically subvert the meaning behind and the practices of his faith at the time and extort the poorest of the poor during the holidays, you know, when they all had to bring their sacrifices to be slain for Passover. They were getting, you have to pay taxes, and then you have to pay Roman tax, and then there's a conversion tax, and there's all of these these bills, excuse me, fines that were levied essentially just to be able to practice your faith. And among very many other things, that was the last straw for him. And so he wanted to basically reset the temple, and we see that in this season.
Yet, even with the pressure, Roumie later reflected.
Thank you. I think for a millisecond, I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go. But I was never worried. I prayed about it, of course, and like everything else that I've committed to on this journey, I have to surrender it. I'm like, Lord, you've given me this opportunity. Must be for a reason. So I'm not going to worry about the consequences. I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm just going to go authentically be who you made me to be and just be present to people.
What happened next on The View was unexpected, but we'll come back to that. First, let's walk through how Jonathan has handled these challenges time and time again, and why he's become a symbol of unshaken faith in a skeptical world. Jonathan Roumie, known for his powerful portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen, has drawn widespread attention, not only for his acting, but for his bold, unapologetic faith. During this interview with Pixie Eye, however, the hosts got more than they bargained for. They kicked things off with a carefully chosen clip from the series, clearly aiming to steer the conversation in a certain direction. What they didn't expect was Roumie's calm, precise dismantling of their atheistic perspective. Take a look.
It is on its way to becoming one of the most popular TV series of all time, with a fan base all over the world.
We are talking about The Chosen. Here's a look.
You Pharisees, you cleanse the outside of a cup and the dish, and then you eat and drink food that goes into a body that inside is full of greed and wickedness. You fools! Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give as alms those things that are within.
So why did the hosts choose that particular clip to kick off the interview? What was the real intention behind it? And more importantly, What message were they trying to send? Before we dive into that deeper question, let's take a moment to break down how Jonathan responded, calmly, clearly, and without flinching. Because by the end of this exchange, it became clear this wasn't just a friendly conversation. It was more like an interrogation. They pushed him to admit that portraying Jesus was merely a role, just another character pulled from the pages of an old religious text. But they didn't stop there. They pressed harder, asking whether the pressure of playing a divine figure ever became too much. And what kind of pressure were they really referring to? Let's take a closer look.
And Elizabeth Tavish, who portrays Mary Magdalene. Good morning. Thank you both for being here. Congrats on the popularity of the show.
Thank you.
It's a huge deal.
It's wild.
We were just talking in the break. I have to know, do you guys feel this added pressure playing these enormous characters, Jesus and Mary Magdalene?
They were referring to the weight of portraying someone divine, as if Jonathan was simply pretending to be something he's not. But Roumie made it clear, this wasn't about pretending. He wasn't cast by coincidence. He believes God placed him in this role for a purpose, and he's come to embrace that fully. Even Jesus faced doubt, he reminded them. He was challenged constantly, just as Roumie was being challenged in that very moment.
I think I felt the pressure pretty early on, and then after a little bit of reflection, I realized that I'm here playing this role for a reason. You know, I think God put me in this position for a very specific reason, and so I have to accept that and just do the best I can with the gifts and talent.
After navigating that question with grace, the host made another attempt to corner Jonathan. This time, shifting the focus to his popularity. They implied that his rise to fame was no different from any other Hollywood actor caught in the revolving door of fleeting roles and fading relevance. In their eyes, Roumie was just the next name in line for the spotlight.
Story, obviously, one of the best stories you're pulling from the Bible. You're relatable and you're aspirational, so you kind of have the best of both worlds. People are obviously interested in the characters, Mary Magdalene and Jesus, but now fans are really interested in you guys as people. How has that?
At that moment, the hosts likely felt they had him cornered. It wasn't about his actual answer. They were more interested in dissecting how he would respond. Would he embrace the fame, or try to distance himself from it? But instead of playing into their setup, Jonathan flipped the script entirely, and what followed was nothing short of a mic drop. Watch how he handled it.
You know, fame is a double-edged sword. You know, it gets you certain benefits in society, and other times you have unexpected encounters with people that are super passionate about the show, and some of them are more appropriately timed encounters than others. But at the end of the day, I think you just have to, you know, just be present with people and have grace and kindness. And when people are sort of occasionally overstepping boundaries of space, you just try to gently let them know that, you know, I'm Jonathan, I'm not Jesus. So, you know, I kind of need my own sort of space as a person, as a human being. Even Jesus needed space. That's why he went off to pray by himself so often, because he was swarmed by people. So it's something that in a sort of a microcosm, I'm beginning to understand why.
Jonathan calmly put them in their place, reminding them that fame is fleeting. Even Jesus, he pointed out, had crowds who followed him, and just as many who opposed him. He took time to be alone. He withdrew. He prayed. The hosts were clearly expecting a surface-level, celebrity-style response. Instead, they were hit with a perspective rooted in timeless truth and spiritual depth.
Well, we know the stories from the Bible are obviously deep. This season is going to take an even deeper tone. Can you kind of guide us into that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think we start to see the beginning of the end of Jesus's ministry on earth, and how he gets to that point, how we get to the inevitable crucifixion.
Now it all makes sense. The reason behind choosing that specific opening clip of Jesus calling out hypocrisy was strategic. It was a subtle attempt to cast Christianity in a negative light, framing it as judgmental or outdated. But the plan backfired. Instead of trapping Jonathan, they ended up exposing their own bias and failing spectacularly in the process. Let's take a quick detour to a surprising face-off with Tucker Carlson. Now, Carlson isn't exactly someone you'd want to get into a biblical back and forth with unless you're extremely well prepared. But as you'll see, Jonathan Roumie didn't just hold his own. He brought the same calm conviction that's become his signature.
Some people would feel like that's a pretty heavy role. I mean, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Basis of the world's largest religion.
Yeah.
God himself, according to Christians. Did you ever feel that on you? Like, that's a lot.
In the first season, I did. There was this moment, especially, which I've kind of talked about at times, where, and I think it still sort of affects me. I actually like telling the story because it's a reminder for me to remember what it's all about and who I'm serving as I endeavor.
Hollywood's relationship with faith has always been uneasy, often mocking it, diluting it, or avoiding it entirely. And when someone boldly brings Christ into the spotlight, the resistance is swift. But Jonathan Roumie isn't fazed. Watch how he holds his ground, calmly dismantling every effort to reduce Jesus to just another historical figure.
So we were about midway through the first season, and the time came for me as Jesus to start preaching, full-on sermons. And we started filming. And then as I was going through these words, I suddenly, it's like I kind of felt I was outside of myself, listening to myself preach to a crowd outside the doors of in our story, Zebedee, James and John's father, Zebedee's house. And there was a crowd of people that was growing, crowd of onlookers, and our wonderful background actors that participate in the show, and many of whom have participated for years.
When asked about the weight of playing Jesus, Roumie shared a raw moment from season 1. Delivering a full sermon from Scripture, he suddenly felt overwhelmed. As the crew listened intently, he was struck with unworthiness, realizing he was speaking God's words. A moment so powerful, it nearly stopped him cold.
And try to mesmerize and galvanize the people that are listening to me and get their attention. And they seemed really attentive, so much so that it made me really self-aware.
Yeah.
And I thought, what am I saying? What are these words? Like, these are holy, holy words said by the holiest being that ever walked the face of the earth. I shouldn't be doing this. This feels wrong. And so I would have those feelings, and then, we would stop and then move on to the next setup and put the camera in a different place. And then as it went on, I just had to stop the production.
And this is where it got even more powerful. Unlike the typical Hollywood response of pushing through, Roumie stopped everything. He quietly pulled director Dallas Jenkins aside and confessed he didn't feel worthy to speak those words. That moment alone stood in stark contrast to the ego-driven norms of the industry.
Listen, man, I'm having a hard time right now. Like, I was starting to feel panicked and overwhelmed, almost like I've only had one panic attack in my life, and it started to feel like it was creeping into that, and I didn't know why or how. Well, I kind of knew. I thought I knew why, and what was going on. But I just said, hey, "Can we slow it down?" And he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I'm saying these words, and here."
Most Hollywood actors wouldn't think twice about reshaping, mocking, or altering Jesus' words to fit a narrative. But Jonathan Roumie? Given the chance to portray Christ in one of the most impactful faith-based series ever, he chose humility over spotlight, not to elevate himself, but to honor the message.
Hearing myself say them, I don't feel worthy to be saying them. This is why I tell this story, because it drives home the point of the gift that I've been given in playing this role.
And how did Dallas Jenkins respond in that vulnerable moment? He gently placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder and said something that silenced every doubt. None of us are truly worthy, but here we are.
And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, "Brother, none of us are truly worthy, but
here we are. I mean, it's you and me. Here we are. We're doing this so that the world may know his story. Those who haven't heard his story may know the impact that he's had on the world and on our...
That moment changed everything. Instead of wrestling with whether he deserved the role, Jonathan surrendered to the truth that this wasn't his doing. It was God's calling. In a business driven by ego and self-promotion, here was a man realizing that the greatest opportunity of his life wasn't something he earned. It was something he was entrusted with.
That was the essence. And it settled my spirit. And I thought, he's right. He's right. For whatever reason, God saw fit to put me in that role and not somebody else. Nobody else auditioned. There weren't auditions for the role. He had just called me up and said, "Do you want to do this again?" And I said, "Yes, of course." I didn't hesitate. But then when we got to that moment, it started to dawn on me the weight of what it was that I was being given to do.
Exactly why his portrayal of Jesus feels so different. It's not a role for fame. It's not a move for personal glory. It's a divine mission, one that awakens hearts and reclaims truth in a world of noise. Of course, Hollywood has its own version of Jesus, a wise teacher, maybe a rebel, a philosopher at best, but never the Son of God. His divinity is diluted, his miracles dismissed, the message reimagined to fit a modern mold. But Jonathan Roumie refuses to play along.
And would then inform the encounters and the experiences that I would have.
His unwavering stance is rooted in a lifelong journey of faith. Raised Greek Orthodox, later confirmed Catholic, Roumie didn't stumble into belief for the sake of a role. He spent years deepening his relationship with God, not branding it for popularity, but living it out for real.
So I made my first communion and my confirmation as a Catholic, and probably when I got into my early 20s, I was revisiting the idea of my Orthodox roots as cousins and family members were getting married in the Orthodox Church, and I so admired the beauty and the sanctity with which they approach the liturgy, which is quite different than Catholicism for the most part. I mean, there's Eastern Catholic rites which are more similar to Greek Orthodox, but it was different. But it didn't draw me to go back completely.
And that's what truly sets him apart from the typical Hollywood narrative. In a culture obsessed with reinvention, where many abandon their values for the next trend or paycheck, Roumie has chosen the opposite path. He's leaned deeper into his faith, embracing prayer, the sacraments, and the rich tradition of the church. A bold move in an industry that often finds real conviction uncomfortable.
It felt like, no, this feels like the truth as I understand it in God's eyes. This seems true. And it's the church that Christ himself ultimately started, and for the reasons God knows, and despite every effort to thwart it, especially the largest empire in the world at the time, despite the Roman Empire's attempts to stamp it out.
Through murder.
Yeah, it didn't happen. It's still going.
When asked whether playing Jesus had changed him, Roumie didn't just say yes. He described a transformation that went far beyond acting. Each season, he's been compelled to spend more time in prayer and stillness, to dwell in God's presence, and to take on spiritual challenges that continue to deepen his walk with Christ.
You Pharisees, you cleanse the outside of a cup and the dish, and then you eat and drink food that goes into a body that inside is full of greed and wickedness. You fools! Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give as alms those things that...
Most actors say a role changes them, but usually they mean psychological preparation, digging into a mindset or emotional framework. But Roumie? He's not studying Jesus from the outside. He's encountering him from the inside. That's the difference. And it's a difference Hollywood can't wrap its head around.
And that means something to me. And so doing this show, playing the character of Jesus, working with the Hallow app, doing all these prayer and meditation challenges with them, learning more about other stories of faith, other people of faith through like the challenges that we have coming up for Lent here. I've grown deeper in my faith. It's drawn me closer to the church, to want to know more about the aspects of the church that I didn't necessarily grow up learning,
In a world where the entertainment industry glorifies self-reinvention and bending to the latest cultural ideology, Roumie stands apart. He's not molding Jesus to fit today's narrative. He's letting Jesus shape him. That kind of faith-driven authenticity is exactly what makes The Chosen such a revelation. And let's not forget the boldness of The Chosen even existing in today's climate. A series that doesn't dilute the gospel, that doesn't reduce Christ to a vague life coach or spiritual influencer, but instead proclaims him as the Son of God, clearly and unapologetically.
It was where you went to catechism,
CCD
after school. And, I didn't learn any of the things that I've learned in the last several years because that's just not designed that way. And the church has such a rich history and tradition. It's so vast. It's such a storehouse. There's so much to know and to learn. And through the experiences of playing Christ and getting to force myself to go into prayer and meditation prior to every season.
That's exactly why The Chosen is one of the most successful crowd-funded series in history. People are tired of empty narratives. They're hungry for truth. They've had enough of watching faith being mocked or ignored on screen. And this show delivers what Hollywood won't. The industry still doesn't get it. It can't figure out why this show has captivated millions, why faith is rising instead of falling, and why an actor like Roumie would choose Christ over career. But we know the answer because God is still moving. Jonathan Roumie isn't just another actor with a big role. He's walking evidence that when you give your life to Christ, He'll use you in ways you never imagined. So let the critics sneer, let Hollywood keep producing sanitized, watered-down stories. It won't stop the truth. Because The Chosen is breaking records, transforming lives, and proving that the gospel still has the final word.
Through these periodical prayer challenges, like we just did one in Advent for Hallow, and now we're doing the Pray 40, which starts today, Ash Wednesday. It's forced me to just spend more time in the.
Yet his confrontation with Tucker Carlson cannot be compared to how he shut down woke Christian mentality on The View. When Jonathan Roumie returned to The View promoting the new season of The Chosen, he wasn't just bringing entertainment. He brought purpose. The questions started lightly. The show's success, its global reach, his portrayal of Jesus. But as soon as the conversation shifted towards social responsibility, the tone changed.
Side of him, though, we see what I'd like to call righteous anger. Can you talk about what brings him to that place?
Yeah, hypocrisy. Hypocrisy within the church establishment, the temple establishment of his time. So seeing religious leaders basically subvert the meaning behind and the practices of his faith at the time and extort the poorest of the poor during the holidays, when they all had to bring their sacrifices to be slain for Passover. They were you have to pay taxes, and then you have to pay Roman tax, and then there's a conversion tax, and there's all of these these bills, fines that were levied essentially just to be able to practice your faith. And among very many other things, that was the last straw for him. And so he wanted to basically reset the temple. And we see that in this season.
Roumie discussed portraying a Christ that gets angry at religious corruption, a timely parallel that hit close to home in the interview itself. The host challenged the message, some even implying that Christianity as it's preached today fosters division.
And that means something to me. And so doing this show, playing the character of Jesus, working with the Hallow app, doing all these prayer and meditation challenges with them, learning more about other stories of faith, other people of faith through like the challenges that we have coming up for Lent here. I've grown deeper in my faith. It's drawn me closer to the church, to want to know more about the aspects of the church that I didn't necessarily grow up learning. I went to public school, so I had the Tuesday afternoon catechism.
In a world where the entertainment industry glorifies self-reinvention and bending to the latest cultural ideology, Roumie stands apart. He's not molding Jesus to fit today's narrative. He's letting Jesus shape him. That kind of faith-driven authenticity is exactly what makes The Chosen such a revelation. And let's not forget the boldness of The Chosen even existing in today's climate. A series that doesn't dilute the gospel, that doesn't reduce Christ to a vague life coach or spiritual influencer, but instead proclaims him as the Son of God, clearly and unapologetically. That's exactly why The Chosen is one of the most successful crowd-funded series in history. People are tired of empty narratives. They're hungry for truth. They've had enough of watching faith being mocked or ignored on screen. And this show delivers what Hollywood won't. The industry still doesn't get it. It can't figure out why this show has captivated millions, why faith is rising instead of falling, and why an actor like Roumie would choose Christ over career. But we know the answer because God is still moving. Jonathan Roumie isn't just another actor with a big role. He's walking evidence that when you give your life to Christ, He'll use you in ways you never imagined. So let the critics sneer. Let Hollywood keep producing sanitized, watered-down stories. It won't stop the truth. Because The Chosen is breaking records, transforming lives, and proving that the gospel still has the final word.
Through these periodical prayer challenges, like we just did one in Advent for Hallow, and now we're doing the Pray 40, which starts today, Ash Wednesday. It's forced me to just spend more time in the present.
Yet his confrontation with Tucker Carlson cannot be compared to how he shut down woke Christian mentality on The View. When Jonathan Roumie returned to The View promoting the new season of The Chosen, he wasn't just bringing entertainment. He brought purpose. The questions started lightly. The show's success, its global reach, his portrayal of Jesus. But as soon as the conversation shifted towards social responsibility, the tone changed.
Side of him, though, we see what I'd like to call righteous anger. Can you talk about what brings him to that place?
Yeah, hypocrisy. Hypocrisy within the church establishment, the temple establishment of his time. So seeing religious leaders basically subvert the meaning behind and the practices of his faith at the time and extort the poorest of the poor during the holidays, when they all had to bring their sacrifices to be slain for Passover. They were you have to pay taxes, and then you have to pay Roman tax, and then there's a conversion tax, and there's all of these these bills, fines that were levied essentially just to be able to practice your faith. And among very many other things, that was the last straw for him. And so he wanted to basically reset the temple.
Roumie discussed portraying a Christ that gets angry at religious corruption, a timely parallel that hit close to home in the interview itself. The host challenged the message, some even implying that Christianity as it's preached today fosters division. But Roumie countered with compassion, highlighting that Jesus stood against injustice, not by force, but by truth. He reminded the audience that his role demands spiritual responsibility, not just screen presence.
Can you talk a little bit about how you take care of yourself in order to be the person people would like you to be and also stay who you are?
Yeah, I think for me it really comes down to making sure that I'm right in my own relationship with God. And for me that means acting out my faith, practicing my faith, and then trying to live at times very difficultly by the the modicums of how to approach life that Jesus taught. Like, he set a really high bar, and it's not easy to follow in his footsteps or his sandal steps. But I try my best, and I try to be present with people when I encounter them on the streets, and even if it's at an inconvenient time, or you know, they're asking something of me and want me to do something, whether it's baptize their babies, or marry couples, or in the one case, hear a confession.
At one point, he was even asked how he handled being seen as Jesus by fans. Roumie calmly clarified, "I remind them my name is Jonathan." That humility, juxtaposed with the pressure of being a spiritual figure on screen, spoke volumes. Then came the tension. A host pressed hard about modern views on the church. Roumie, without breaking composure, answered the challenge without anger or retreat.
Are you finding that people are having a little bit of trouble in separating you?
Watch the response of Jonathan. They cannot expect it.
In these characters, like any great TV show, you start to identify, and then the fact that it's this story, that it's the greatest story ever told, now brings it to a whole other level. And they're like, oh, I can relate to Jesus in a way that I never thought I could before.
And then, as Sunny Hostin tried to challenge him, she ended up conceding in modern society.
Our crew, Zach, came to me months ago and said, I'm Catholic. You gotta watch this show about Jesus. I was like, I know a lot about Jesus, and I don't.
Roumie did not take a moment and shut her up with a sentence which she completely shut.
I think there's always more to learn.
There's always more to learn, and what that's, you're so profound. I think what was fascinating to me is growing up.
They clearly started off the session thinking this was going to be another one of those segments where faith was subtly mocked, where belief was dismissed as wishful thinking. But how wrong she was. But Roumie nailed it. And that's the power of how Roumie handles confrontation. Not with retaliation, but revelation. So don't go anywhere, because in the end you'll get to see how Jonathan responded in a completely different follow-up interview. It's a whole new layer to the story.
So you've been playing Jesus on The Chosen for 5 seasons now. What sort of conversations did you and Dallas have initially about the kind of Jesus that you wanted to show? Because your Jesus it's a very different portrayal than...
There are interviews, and then there are moments that shake the room. Moments that leave even the most hardened skeptics scrambling for words. Jonathan Roumie's conversation with his interviewer was one such.
Jim Caviezel's Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, or Willem Dafoe's in The Last Temptation of Christ, or you know what else is a good one, but also very different than yours, is Max von Sydow.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the greatest story ever told. But all of those Jesuses, or Jesi, I don't know what they're...
Right from the start, Roumie's presence was calm, yet commanding. The topic was faith in an increasingly secular world, a world that, as Roumie puts it, has tried to banish God from visible culture. The host, though respectful, was skeptical, but that skepticism wouldn't last long.
In some ways, contemporary feeling Jesus?
I think what makes it feel like that we have, that all of those other portrayals didn't have access to, was the format of time in long-form storytelling to build characters and build relationships over episodes. You're seeing the nuances of his character, his quirks, the things that nobody's ever taken the time to explore are the humanity of these characters, the day-to-day of these characters. And so if you believe they existed, and I do, they were human beings.
Roumie's portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen has resonated with millions because, unlike past depictions, his Jesus feels real. He laughs, he cries, he jokes, and he struggles. This wasn't a distant, untouchable deity. It was a Jesus people could relate to.
And then he goes through it. I'm like, okay, I get that.
I'm just in my head, I was thinking of that sort of cliche of an actor saying, oh, what's my motivation? And in your case, the answer was, we got to bring about the salvation of the world. Play it like that.
Saving souls. I got to save more souls.
And so the decision was made that you were going to do The Chosen. Before that, maybe scuffling is too strong of a word, but you were just sort of a jobbing actor.
Struggle busing.
Struggle busing. How does it happen that a struggle busing actor makes it big playing Jesus?
I think that the path to that is absolute and uncompromising surrendering to a higher power, things that are beyond my control.
This wasn't just an actor speaking. It was a man who deeply believes what he portrays. Then came the question that changed the tone of the conversation, when the host asked if he thinks a non-believer could authentically play Jesus.
What does your faith allow you to give to the role that a non? No, it's interesting because you're saying that who you are allows you to play the role of Jesus with a particular authenticity. Do you feel that someone who is a non-believer could
Roumie paused, smiled, then, in a measured tone, delivered one of the most profound responses I've ever heard.
Or a non-Catholic might not be able to give?
I feel that it lends an authenticity to the role that allows me to understand more of why Jesus did the things he did and said the things he did than somebody who is completely unfamiliar. And I think I struggle to follow Jesus like anybody else who considers themselves a Christian. But the struggle is part of it. And I think God knows what we struggle with, but we're still challenged to do what he would do in those situations. And I think because I actually believe that seems to have lent me a kind of credibility and an authenticity in approaching the character that maybe people haven't seen.
At this point, the host was totally speechless. But Roumie's own story is one of surrender, something many atheists, including this host, struggle to grasp.
That you're getting that sort of attention combined with the fact that you're getting it for playing Jesus strikes me as a potentially psychologically and spiritually combustible situation. Does it feel that way to you?
No, because I recognize that none of this is about me. I don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And so I recognize that when I come out to those speeches and people react the way they do and people yell out.
Roumie narrates how he spent years trying to control his own life, how he chased success but kept failing. It wasn't until he fell to his knees and surrendered to God that everything changed. 3 months later, he got the chosen.
You don't matter.
Dust in the wind.
But then also with what you said about feeling like you've been put here for a reason, that you're saying there is something special about you. Those seem to me like somewhat contradictory ideas. How do you reconcile them? And then also, there was never some small part of you that's like, oh, I am special. There's people liking me because I'm special, and that means that I matter in some way. None of that little sort of ego gratification temptation ever creeps into your head?
I think if I said there wasn't anything at all, I'd be lying. Do I allow it to become my reason for doing what I do? No. So the paradox that you're describing, I guess it is kind of hard to make that distinction. Yes, there's for me a sense of mission, but the mission is about Jesus, in this case with the chosen. It's about God. That's what this experience is.
This is where Roumie's words pierce through the skeptic mindset. Atheism thrives on control, on the idea that humans shape their own destiny. But what if true freedom comes from letting go? The moment of total humiliation came when Roumie made this atheist host understand that being a Christian comes with many battles, including spiritual attacks.
Roxy McDevitt says, Jonathan, have you experienced more escalated levels of spiritual warfare the longer you've been in this unique role? What are some of the ways you fight spiritual attacks?
Being a Christian comes with deep spiritual battles, and Jonathan Roumie has felt the weight of that responsibility. In this interview, he openly discusses the spiritual attacks he has endured and how he fights them, and with a grace so profound it brought the host to his knees.
fight any and all spiritual attacks with prayer, like the Rosary, Divine Mercy, the Angelus, all of those. I feel like I've become more hyper aware of spiritual warfare, and I've probably sensed more attacks. I haven't been struck by lightning, praise Jesus, at this point.
That did happen, didn't it?
Happened to Jim, yeah, while he was on the cross. So
Did you
I'm
ask him what
praying that
was
doesn't
like?
happen.
That's right. We're going to make sure it's a real clear day.
Yeah.
What,
yeah.
Did he tell you what that was like?
I mean, it's
just crazy.
Yeah, basically that's kind of what the reaction was. It's like I think he's been able to make sense of it as just being part of Christ's suffering. At the end of the day, everything that he experienced, dislocating shoulder, he had heart surgery, he had all these things happen to him, as just offering it up and anything.
His words suggest that spiritual warfare is not just metaphorical. It manifests physically and emotionally. But this is something an atheist never believes in. Of course, how can they believe in what they denounce? When asked how he combats these attacks, Roumie doesn't hesitate.
Those 2 weeks was for the Last Supper, and I had my spiritual director. He came out to be with me, and I was sitting in the hair and makeup chair, and next thing I know, like I get these massive pains, like just shooting up into my ear, and I'm like, it's just anxiety. It's like, at one point I had heart palpitations. I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know what's happening, but I'm just, and I texted my spiritual director, who's in the other room, and he's like, I'm saying a rosary for you right now. And in 15 minutes, it all went away and everything was fine. But I think kind of speaking to what the sort of attacks and things like that, I think the spiritual attacks kind of manifest themselves in so many different kinds of ways. Maybe that's some of it. Maybe that's just physical anxiety. Maybe that's just me trying to do the best I can and not, ruin it for Jesus. So,
He told about the attack during the Last Supper, how it started subtly. A strange tightness in his chest, a pain in his ear that had no medical explanation, just a growing sense that something invisible was pushing back. Then his heart began to race, pounding in a way that left him breathless, panicked. Jonathan did something rare in Hollywood. He didn't power through. He didn't call a medic. He texted his spiritual director, "Please pray. Something's wrong." Within minutes, the pain began to subside. His heartbeat slowed. The fear lifted, and Jonathan knew this wasn't just nerves. He was in the middle of spiritual warfare.
That's been my state of mind for several months, especially as we get closer and closer. And I'm sure, even though I'll have a lot less dialogue once we go into the arrest and the crucifixion and the scourging, I'll have a lot less dialogue, but I don't think it'll be any less emotionally and spiritually taxing.
That was the moment Roumie knew he was dealing with something spiritual, not emotional, not psychological, and not physical. The battle continued off camera. There were days he sat in silence before filming, unable to rehearse, unable to speak. He would cry without knowing why. The words of Jesus, words he had rehearsed, suddenly hit him in ways he couldn't predict. And then Jonathan get emotional.
But when I last left my house before I started filming in Utah in April, I took a look around and I thought, the next time I see this place, I will have completed the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I was overwhelmed with emotion. I was like, sorry. Because that means the journey's almost over. And I've spent the better part of 6 years with my best mate, talking to him and asking him for advice and how do I play this scene and what did he go through, and allow me even a modicum of the experience that you had, even like a percent of a percent of a percent, to be able to understand.
And yet the crew stood still. The cameras rolled, and something real passed through him, like he wasn't acting anymore, but being used for something divine. The weight of the role began to bleed into his life. Jonathan started praying more. He added fasting. He leaned into confession. He wasn't just performing Jesus. He was living closer to him than ever before.
Experience more escalated levels of spiritual warfare the longer you've been in this unique role. What are some of the ways you fight spiritual attacks?
Well, I fight any and all spiritual attacks with prayer, like the Rosary, Divine Mercy, the Angelus, all of those. I feel like I've become more hyper aware of spiritual warfare, and I've probably sensed more attacks. I haven't been struck by lightning, praise Jesus.
And coming back to mockery, people think could stop Jonathan by this. They began the interview expecting just another faith segment, something easy to challenge, maybe even poke fun at. They thought it would be the usual, subtle mockery, veiled skepticism, and the dismissal of belief as nothing more than wishful thinking. But they were wrong. So very wrong. Still, even Jonathan Roumie's powerful appearance on The View is eclipsed by his jaw-dropping exchange with Raymond Arroyo on EWTN News, a moment that showcased his boldest, clearest expressions of faith.
Able to book a job, but I wanted to have a firm technique that I could survive on. And so I trained in Eric Morris's system.
Oh, yeah.
And he was, basically a guy that combined a number of different method-based systems together to create like one of the most comprehensive acting systems anybody could ever study, which I use still to this day.
You still use
I
that
do.
to prepare for the. How did you apply that to this role? I mean, the challenge is.
Yeah.
You don't have the raw stuff that other, you can base it on somebody, you can build a role on a historic figure.
I
This
can't
is
watch
hard.
video exactly.
No,
of
there's no
Jesus.
YouTube of
Yeah,
Jesus.
There's no YouTube of Jesus.
In a time when faith is constantly challenged, Roumie doesn't just defend belief, he embodies it. His calm confidence, grounded in humility, makes disbelief feel small in comparison. You don't just hear conviction in his voice, you see it in the way he lives.
Chosen, but before there was.
For me, it kind of stems back to the challenges of playing Jesus to begin with. Like, well, how do you do that? Robert Powell once in an interview said, to try to tackle the character of Jesus, he's unplayable.
And when he made the next statement, it totally put off the atheist interviewer.
Like, he's impossible to play. So none of us know what it's like to be divine. We do know what it's like to be human. So the thing that I do is to bring the utmost of my humanity to the role as Jesus, and then let the Lord and the Holy Spirit sort out the divinity aspects of it. And so
I bring as much humanity as I can, he says. The divinity? I leave that to the Holy Spirit. That single line silenced the room. Because in one sentence, Roumie dismantled a central claim of atheism, that Jesus was just a man. His answer didn't just counter the narrative. It flipped it entirely.
And possibly of my career is wrapping my head around how to communicate what actually happened at the Last Supper in a way that people feel that, as opposed to merely just hearing the words in Scripture, but feel what it is that he meant, and not knowing what exactly that looked like. So the only option I have, whether it's that or it's in the Garden of Gethsemane where he's sweating drops like blood or blood, depending on the translation you read, what generated that? What did that feel like? I have no idea. So I have to surrender that moment.
At that moment, it was clear atheism offers doubt, but faith offers proof through transformation. And Jonathan Roumie remains a living proof that Jesus is still at work.
Say, God, you have to direct my steps in these scenes because they're beyond my comprehension. They're beyond my ability to infer what you were feeling. Like, Lord only knows. But I'm here, I'm open, I'm a vessel. Use me the way you want people to experience.
Because Jonathan Roumie isn't just acting in faith, he's walking in it. And the impact speaks for itself. Now, let's see how Jonathan responded in a completely different follow-up interview. It's a whole new layer to the story. In a follow-up interview after his viral appearance on The View, Jonathan Roumie shared what was really going through his mind behind the scenes.
Thank you. I think for a millisecond, I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go. But I was never worried. I prayed about it, of course. And like everything else that I've committed to on this journey, I have to surrender it. I'm like, Lord, you've given me this opportunity. I must be for a reason. So I'm not going to worry about the consequences. I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm just going to go authentically be who you made me to be and just be present to people. And
he explained that while many people feared the segment would become hostile, he wasn't afraid. In his words, they're just people, and they were open. Roumie later revealed that he gave each host a rosary, and they all accepted it.
Conversations with every one of the hosts, and they were lovely. And what I realized is there are so many people that are just on a journey. They're searching. They don't necessarily, they may not necessarily believe. They may not necessarily know what to expect. But they're searching, and they were open to what I was bringing to them through the Holy Spirit. And that's the main thing. I gave rosaries to everybody, and they
good for you.
They happily accepted
How did they take them? Yeah.
They happily accepted them.
What did Whoopi say?
She was great. She's met Pope Francis, I think, twice now. So we're neck and neck. So I gotta beat her. I gotta one up her. I gotta meet him a third time before she does, because otherwise my reputation.
That's the beauty of faith in action. Even in a setting that could have turned divisive, he chose love, presence, and grace. It's not just about playing Jesus. It's about living like him. If there's one takeaway here, it's that courage in Christ doesn't look like shouting louder. It looks like standing taller, speaking kinder, and showing up no matter the cost.